Hey, it's Ken Gagne with YouTube channel Gamebits, host of IndieSider, where I play indie games and then speak with the developers. And this week I'm playing High Strangeness, which came out in May of 2015 for the Wii U and Mac and PC via Steam. I'm playing the Wii U version here, supplied to me by the developer, Mr. Ben Shostak, the lead developer of Barnyard Intelligence Games, with whom I'll be speaking later in this interview. You can also listen to the audio edition of the interview at IndieSider.net. Speaking of the audio edition, due to a slight editing error, I didn't capture this game's audio, but I am pasting in the soundtrack that is available from Bandcamp. I'm loading a saved game for High Strangeness because this game has some RPG elements, and this way I'm skipping past the tutorial and the opening narrative to get right into the gameplay. And here I'm on a quest to save Old Man Jacob's glasses, cane, and medicine. Find them in this strange world that my character from Podunk USA has been pulled into. Now you can see that the gameplay is very similar to Secret of Mana or Secret of Evermore, two Square games for the Super Nintendo, and there's definitely an old school retro vibe going on here, both in the graphics and the audio. The soundtrack is mostly chiptune, using old computers as instruments for a classic retro feel. And it is real-time combat. I can use my CD right there as a missile weapon to stun enemies, and I can swing my flashlight as a melee weapon, and I can use each one infinitely. The green meter, however, will go down each time I use it. That is my mana, or mana if you prefer. And there is no limit to how I use my items as long as I have the strength in my mana meter to use them, which is great for when you're using stuff like bombs. Imagine Legend of Zelda with infinite bombs. You don't have to keep running and buying more. So at this point, I've already established some bridges that I'm using to bypass areas I've already been to. Those 4 switches right there. I used one of the other items in my inventory. Let me switch to it here. This is my red skull, which I can use to stun enemies around me. So I just go ahead and equip it, and bam! I hit all 4 of those switches right at once. And I can use that as often as I want as long as there's mana available. However, it doesn't hurt enemies, it only stuns them. Now in this room there was a little puzzle where these angled walls, I had to throw my CD off them and make them hit that switch up there, while I stood on that other switch just above and to the right there, and then I was able to hit both switches simultaneously using my CD. So watch this, something like that. So you have to move the blocks around so that they all refract off each other. Kind of like an old Apple II game I used to have, actually. But anyway, I digress. I'm continuing on my quest here, and I'll get to the really unusual feature of this game, the unique one right here, where you see these blocks that I can't bypass. So I pull out that crystal skull, and bam, the 16-bit graphics completely change, and now it's more 8-bit. And you can see where those rocks were, I can now walk right past them. There's a path where there wasn't before. And then I can switch right back to the 16-bit world, which is pretty cool. So the gameplay mechanics are pretty much the same in either one. Let's actually switch back to the 8-bit a little bit more. And I think it looks a little bit more Atari 2600 than NES. I don't remember the NES being quite this blocky, but either way, it's pretty cool. The gameplay mechanics are almost identical. I'm still going around swinging my flashlight, killing skeletons. The difference being primarily that I can't run, and I don't think I can do combo attacks with my flashlight in the 8-bit world. The 16-bit I can. So at this point in the game, you saw me do that to get past the rocks that were there. The mechanics or the differences between 8 and 16-bit otherwise aren't too noticeable, but there are puzzles where you have to use one or the other to bypass certain areas. So here I just found Jacob's last item, his cane. I already found his glasses and his medicine previously. So now that I have all 3, I can progress to the southeast. Let me make sure that I didn't miss anything in this waterfall when I was in 8-bit mode. Apparently water simply doesn't flow in 8-bit mode. Okay. So while I go to return Jacob's items, let me bring on Mr. Ben Shostak, the developer of Barnyard Intelligence Games. I have tons of questions to talk to him about regarding this game, especially the fact that High Strangeness, fun fact, is the first ever video game to be successfully backed on Kickstarter. Ben and his crew ran a campaign for 90 days back in 2009, 6 years ago, and they received $1,500, a little bit more than actually. And they promised to bring out the game on Xbox by 2010, and the game finally came out for Wii U and Steam in 2015. So I'm going to be speaking to him about the crowdfunding process in crowdfunding's infancy, why the game switched to Wii U, and how it's been selling on that platform, especially given that it's not the best-selling platform in general. So with that, I'm going to continue playing this game while I interview Mr. Ben Shostak. So enjoy the interview. Today I'm speaking with Mr. Ben Shostak, the owner and lead developer of Barnyard Intelligence Games, developers of High Strangeness. Hi, Ben.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
Doing pretty well.
Thank you for sending me the review code for High Strangeness. I've enjoyed playing it on the Wii U. I hope that you've gotten a lot of feedback like that since it came out.
Yeah, the reception has been really positive from all the folks who have checked it out, and it's great to get it out there after all that time developing it.
I can imagine. I want to talk to you a lot about the development process and the gestation period, but before I get to that, I want to talk to you about some of your inspirations for the game, because just as I'm playing it, when I first saw it at Boston Fig a few years ago, the game I most likened it to was Secret of Evermore, because at least at the very beginning, you have a pet cat, whereas Secret of Evermore, you have a pet dog, and you're running around this sort of top-down view, and it's real-time action, and you're whisked away to this fantasy adventure. But I've seen other interviews with you where you mentioned a lot of other games that inspired you, and that wasn't necessarily one of them. So can you talk to me about what your inspirations were for the game's world, the mechanics, any aspect of it?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of it just derives from basically the two generations that we're using in the game, which are the NES and Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis eras. And the NES is pretty specific to the original Legend of Zelda. That was the origin of the action-adventure, action RPG game as we kind of see in the 16-bit era with, like you said, Secret of Evermore, Star Tropics, Chrono Trigger, Link to the Past. Those are a lot of the different games that we were inspired by, and we kind of part of the concept of using them both together and switching between the worlds is the concept of a multi-dimensional existence and the different dimensions, and that all kind of factors into the mystery of the game. And the designer of the game, Steve Jenkins, he came up with the concept partially as a kind of like a melding of all the different things that he was inspired by with the different era of action RPGs and chiptune music, which is kind of developed out of some discussions with Rich Vreeland, Disasterpiece. Steve was talking with him, and this was actually around the time when we started our Kickstarter. Rich was doing a Kickstarter for one of his albums, and this was back when Kickstarter was in beta, so it was a closed system, and we were the first game to actually successfully complete a Kickstarter campaign. So basically, Steve started up the Kickstarter, and we all got together, and we didn't really know what to do with it. We had we brought in like $1,500, something like that, which is peanuts compared to what a Kickstarter campaign is these days. All of that, the technical aspects of having a game that switches you between these two generations, and also has the chiptune soundtrack to it, was kind of a modern take on classic genres and hardware.
Yeah, I've seen other games where there are two takes on a single world. Usually it takes the form of a light world and a dark world, or even in Paper Mario, it's different dimensions. But I've never actually seen it done the way you're doing it, which is 8-bit and 16-bit. Are you aware of any precedents for what you've done here?
I have seen there's other games out there like Egoland where you kind of transition over the course of the game between those periods. But I think ours was kind of the first that I know of that actually switches between them on the fly, and when you do that, it changes the entire mechanics of the game. So when you're in the 8-bit world, you are moving in 4 directions, and you have a basic attack, and it also affects all of your enemies around you. So you're really able to kind of switch between two different almost sets of hardware when you're tackling your challenges.
I'm curious about the constraints you impose on yourself when creating the 8-bit version of High Strangeness' world. For example, Shovel Knight, I believe they actually took the NES color palette and constrained themselves to that. They said everything we draw in this new game we're making has to be drawn from this palette. What did you decide to use to define your interpretation of 8-bit? How did you decide what qualifies as 8-bit in High Strangeness?
Yeah, the main constraints that we had that we imposed were in the 8-bit world. We mostly stick to the NES color palette, and the in the 16-bit world, we hang around the amount of colors that a Super Nintendo would use, but we don't stick to that specific palette, and we also allow transparency in that world. Whereas in the 8-bit world, whenever there is going to be transparency, we use like kind of dithering, where it's every other pixel. So we have that like conveyed in the menu and like the HUD. So it's kind of constantly there on the screen in your HUD. You see that transition as you switch between one to the other world. And the other aspect, we kind of originally we had it set in the I believe 5x4 is the NES and Super Nintendo ratio resolution, and we had it set original console resolutions. So when you switch between 8 and 16, it'll double the pixels or halve the pixels.
The tool by which the main character switches between these two worlds is a crystal skull, and when I see that, I can't help but think of Indiana Jones 4, which for many people is not a favorable comparison. Were you concerned that might happen?
Yeah, it's funny because that happened like in the middle of developing the game. That the movie was released, and for a second we thought that the whole concept was doomed. But when Dan Aykroyd came out with his Crystal Skull vodka, and that was considered cool and not bogged down by this, and also 50 Cent Blood in the Sand had a crystal skull. There was more cultural relevance to it than that specific movie, but it was amusing to us. It was kind of an inside joke. We were making Shia LaBeouf jokes about the game, like putting him in as a character.
Oh dear. One of the more obvious references and more intentional that I picked up on, in the first 5 minutes of the game, I picked up on 2 Earthbound references. I take it you guys are fans.
Yes.
I mean, but then who isn't, right?
Yeah.
I'm so excited to see that Nintendo released Earthbound 0 for the Virtual Console and Earthbound before that. I can't help but think that they're leading us up to finally releasing Mother 3.
Maybe. We'll have to see.
So you mentioned some of the other collaborators you had on this project, Steve Jenkins and some of the others. You have quite the team of collaborators for this project. Some indie games like Axiom Verge are done by just a single individual, but you had quite a few people pitching in on this game. How did you collaborate among so many people? I mean, do you have a studio that you all working together?
No, we're all completely remote. Like our main team, myself, Steve, Sam Bennett. Sam did the watercolor illustrations, and Steve did most of the pixel art. We did use some contractors to fill out the rest of the pixel artwork. But for the programming, that was myself doing the vast majority of it. We brought on Chris Truitt. He's the developer of Master Spy, which is a hardcore 2D spy-based game, it's really cool if you want to check it out. For the musical talent, that was all Steve. He runs the Telefuture record label, and he has great relationships with a lot of music artists. And when we originally kickstarted the project, he got some music from Disaster Piece. And throughout the development of the game, we worked a lot with Dino Leonetti from Cheap Dinosaurs to do like the other part of our soundtrack. So we've got we've got a great set of music to the game, and both of the soundtracks are actually out there to pick up.
Despite so many people pitching in on this game, I don't know if it's due to geography and bumping into you at Boston Fig, but even in the online interviews I see about this game, it almost seems like you've become the public face for High Strangeness. How did that happen? Are you the unofficial marketing guru for the company?
I wouldn't say I'm a guru in marketing, but in general, it's something that it's been a challenge to get the project together and complete, because all of us working on this in our free time, this has been something we have to kind of like fight other priorities for to get the game developed, and I've just kind of taken on the role of doing the public facing stuff. It's just something that I learn as I go, and getting out there, I meet just a lot of people in the industry and in the field that inspire me to keep working on this, and in doing more game development. But yeah, that kind of leads into the duration of the project. Working on it as a passion project for all of us, it's been a challenge, because getting halfway shown the game at MagFest. So that was probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years into developing was the first time that we showed it to anybody. So that was when the project became real to us as an actual product out there. And from then on, we were doing our internal development and kind of working towards milestone builds. But from there, I kind of took the lead with showing the game at MagFest, at PAX, and in Boston Fig. Part of that was building an audience, and the other part was looking for a publisher to help us. And out of our first appearance at PAX East, we heard back from Midnight City, and this was when they were first launching their brand. So they reached out to us, and we worked together to they had as part of what we needed to get the game completed, we got an advance from them to complete all the artwork for the game. So from then on, it was we actually had a path to complete the game. We were able to do the art assets that just internally we did not have the resources to do. So that kind of enabled us to complete the game. And from signing with Midnight City was about 2 years from that to release, and part of that was the challenges Midnight City went through.
So when the Kickstarter first ran in 2009, the projected ship date for the game was sometime in 2010. The game came out in 2015.
Yep.
It sounds like the delays were due to seeking a publisher and also just juggling all the other priorities that you as independent artists have.
Yeah, and we didn't really have an idea of the scope of the game until we really into development and had an idea for how much time it took to create a piece of content and refine it. Yeah, a lot of it was just kind of out of our personal limitations and the scope of the game that we had developed, and maybe we would have scoped it differently if we knew how long it would take to do things. But yeah, we were able to get the game completed, so that's what matters.
A quick point of clarification, I introduced you as the owner and lead developer of Barnyard Intelligence Games, and the game was published by Midnight City. So who is Crystal Labs?
Crystal Labs is Steve Jenkins' his alias for game development and for his music work. We partnered together for releasing the game, so it's like we share the direction responsibilities for the game.
Gotcha. You mentioned how you brought the game to MagFest, Boston Fig, PAX East. What sort of reception did it get at these events, and did the game evolve in any way as a result of the feedback you received from these early testers?
Yeah, we did receive a lot of great feedback. The most important thing, and this was the first first event where we showed the game, we were really focused on telling the story of the game. Playing it by ourselves, we would load up a debug build that was kind of queued up to the level we were going to play and test. And we started off our demo with like kind of a slow crawl with text on it, because that was, for us, we logically thought that's how you start the story. So we had it was like almost a minute of, like, looking back, it was like an awful thing to put in there, but it was a minute of crawling text with it was a detailed illustration, but it's not something what you sign up for when you want to sit down and just jump into a game and enjoy it. We just kind of learned to think more in user experience and think about just the story of somebody playing the game versus the story of what we want the game to be.
Right, it's one of those challenges that we face is how do you integrate player agency with narrative, because they're both really important, but you need to compromise somewhere along the line so that the player still has a sense of ownership in what the story is.
Mm-hmm.
So as you said, this is one of the first games to go on Kickstarter, and the first game to be successfully funded on Kickstarter, and Kickstarter was, as you said, still in beta back then. Nowadays, when people think about crowdfunding, Kickstarter is sort of the default venue, and there are alternatives people can explore, but they usually consider Kickstarter first. What made you consider Kickstarter when it wasn't even on most people's radar back then?
This was an idea that Steve came up with because from his business doing like new wave and like different types of music releases, he was always looking at like different ways to distribute things and different ways to start and sell projects. So it was something that I think the part that appealed to him a lot was the physical media aspect, because like a lot of what Telefuture does is create limited release vinyls and even music on like Sega Genesis carts. Like they're on like custom boards you can put into a Genesis and play music. So with the physical media aspect, we had like some really high quality prints of the artwork for the game as rewards, and partial soundtracks and stuff like that we were able to send like right after the campaign before we were able to complete the game.
Crowdfunding has changed a lot in the 6 years since you ran this campaign. I would say that, for example, you asked for what is nowadays a pretty trivial sum of a mere $1,500. I mean, that's only 4 figures compared to the 6 or 7 that a Castlevania or a Shenmue can get. Now, there's been a lot of complaints, or concerns at least, that these high-profile Kickstarters from AAA studios, they may be bringing users to the platform, but they are encouraging a misperception about what it takes to actually fund a game. Do you think that High Strangeness would do better or worse in this 6 years later if you were to go on Kickstarter?
I think it would probably be a different. It would definitely be a different campaign, but yeah, I think it would kind of change the way we think about the game, because there's completely different business models now with early access and things like that. It's not necessarily something that would lend well to our project, but I think if we were starting the project now, we probably would not take it on Kickstarter, because it just seems like the campaign process is something that you should really only tackle if you have an idea that will market very well and you have the capability to do that marketing for it. And I think we're kind of the more of the quiet developers who will focus on getting the game done and getting it out there. And that was part of our focus with using a publisher to help us get the game out.
I've been a backer on Kickstarters that have taken longer than expected to complete, and my philosophy is it's done when it's done. Kickstarter is not a store. I did not submit a pre-order. I've seen comments, though, from other backers of those same projects that are quite antsy to get their product and are quite mean about it in times. Did you have any early backers who were not supportive of what they may have perceived as delays in the game's development?
No, it was actually, since it was such a small community at that point, the backers were always very they're very cool. They were interested in the game development. They would have probably appreciated more updates and stuff like that. But in general, it was a completely different mood when the process started off. I think now you're seeing that people are looking for games as a service more, and they think that when they invest in something, they're going to get like constant feedback, and that they're also buying ownership in the game itself. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you're by signing on to do a Kickstarter, you're opening yourself up for more transparency, and people get angry if you're not transparent enough. And they also get angry if you are transparent and you're not making the decisions that they want. So I think it's a good problem to have people that are passionate and maybe angry about your product versus people who haven't even heard of it. So I think that's kind of one way of looking at it.
Yeah, Kickstarter is still doing its job of making impossible products come to life, but I think it's true that there's probably more a sense of entitlement among the backers than there was 6 years ago, when they recognized that they were just taking a chance on something. So in the original Kickstarter, the game was suggested to be launching for Xbox. At some point that moved to the Wii U, which for the last 2 years has been probably my favorite console, although I think I'm just now shifting to see the PS4 that way. But most people would agree that the Wii U commercially is the weaker of the next generation or current generation options. I know you also release on Steam for Mac and PC, but as far as consoles go, why would you choose the Wii U?
Well, when we originally shopped the game out to the different first parties, like the Nintendo platform was just it was the best fit for the game in terms of like the nostalgia of the game and all the things that we were referenced or inspired by, and so that Nintendo latched onto the game and they really liked it. So that was kind of like just the logical decision to go with them as the main platform to publish on, and just financially it made the most sense to focus on the Wii U, even though it might not get as much of a return as the other platforms. It was just a good fit for that audience, and being with myself being like the only programmer, you didn't really have the resources available to do 5 different console launches at once.
Does that mean that you'll see yourself porting this game to other consoles one at a time?
Yeah, we definitely want to port the game to other consoles, and that's just something that we're figuring out, like the business side of that stuff, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to get it onto Sony and Microsoft platforms, and maybe onto 3DS or something like that.
Oh, that'd be excellent. So one last question before we wrap up. I'm wondering, the game has now been out for 3 months. I usually interview developers just as their game is coming out. You have had the opportunity instead for more of a longer view on the game's release. What in the game's first 3 months on the market has surprised you, if anything?
The one thing that really surprised me was, and all of us really, was just the immense amount of titles that are on Steam now. And you mentioned how Nintendo Wii U is the least adopted of the consoles this generation, but we sold 4 times as many units on the Wii U as we sold on Steam. We didn't really know how to approach it with Steam when we first launched on there, so I don't think we had like our best screenshots and all of that prepared on there. But we had like a light launch on Steam, and by the time this comes out, we will be on sale on Steam. So we're anxiously waiting to see how it sells on there, because we don't know if like our challenges with selling on there are price specific, or it's just we didn't catch on to the YouTuber channel or something like that.
It's really fascinating to me to hear that the Wii U version sold so many more units than the Steam version, because I know this is anecdotal, but Zeboyd Games, creators of Breath of Death and Cthulhu Saves the World, I remember when they released their games on Xbox 360, they sold a certain number of units in the first year. And then they ported the games to Steam, and they sold just as many units in like the first 3 months. And they basically said, we are never again doing a console-only release because it's not profitable for them. But it sounds like it really depends on what platforms you're looking at and exactly which audience your game is geared at.
Yeah, and like the key difference is how many other titles are there on the platform you're launching on, because on the Wii U, we were featured on there in the front page of their store for like well over a week. But on Steam, our visibility window expired in a day. You had to search for a game after that point.
Yeah, it's much easier to stand out when there are fewer people in the crowd.
Yeah.
Excellent. Wow, that's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that insight.
Sure.
So I've been speaking with Ben Shostak of High Strangeness, available now for Mac and PC and Wii U. Ben, can you remind us where to find either you or any of the companies involved in this game online?
Sure. You can find more information about the game at highstrangenessgame.com. You can find myself on Twitter at Agent Moo.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thanks a lot.